And so Augustine, because he was so beloved, by these folks. Morning, brother. Pretty much anything he said, he could have told them that the sky was orange and they probably would have believed him. He'd come up with some way. And so, he's saying infant baptism is necessary because if they aren't baptized, then they can possibly die and go to hell if they're not one of the elect. All right, of course. So he's basically teaching Calvinism hundreds of years before Calvin ever shows up, and he's saying that not only is the water changed in baptism, but the person is changed, and so the baby that's being baptized becomes elect through that baptism. So even if God had elected the child to go to hell, the baptism can change the election, and so, of course, people were all over that. He was teaching the necessity of sponsors for the child, godparents who were responsible for the upbringing of the child. This way they were ensuring that the child was going to get brought up in the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. And then just absolutely lunatic. I think he must have been hanging around with Muhammad or something at some point there, because this is the kind of crazy stuff Muhammad would have come up with. Is that the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ was a 1,000-year process where he came back piece by piece during the 1,000 years to the Roman Catholic communion table as the Eucharist, which I'm assuming then that they were going to eat him, have a feast on him. So that's where we left off last week with this insanity that was coming in at this time. And of course, again, we have the Roman Catholic Church is fully formed at this point. Not all the doctrines are there, but it's wide open for all those things to come through. And anybody that's not willing to play along, is being at the very least ostracized, if not outright murdered, in this time. Now we're still in the 4th century here, to the latter half of the 4th century, and some of the things we're going to see coming on now, it just keeps adding to the mess. All right, in it's 335 A.D., which is 10 years after, if I can remember the name of the Nicene Council, and so we'll have Constantine is still the emperor. Well, he decides to move the government, the center of government for the Roman Empire, from Rome to Istanbul. All right, and he moves it there, and he renames the city after himself, Constantinople. All right, it was turned back to Istanbul when Muslims took over there much later in history on that. But so of course Constantine pretended to become a Christian, made Christianity, the Alexandrian cult variety of Christianity, which is the Roman Catholic Church, the state religion. And of course, in the Roman Empire, the emperors were the head of the state religion. All right, the Pontifex Maximus there. Now, there's a bishop of Rome who is technically under the emperor. So when he leaves, okay, and heads off to Constantinople to set up the government there, of course he's lifted, we talked about last week, all these official persecutions against Christians, because it's now become the state religion. Of course, it looks like everything's been made wide open and wonderful and great, but it's not the truth, because unless you chose to follow along in the perverted doctrines that they were in, well, you weren't part of the true church. Salvation is only in the Roman Catholic Church. I was taught that as a boy. growing up in the Roman Catholic Church. So you had to adhere to these doctrines. So again, that's why you have all these what look like splinter groups out there who are not. They're the Bible-believing Christians who have refused to go along with all of this. So what's happened here is Satan has switched strategy. And it's the same switch in strategy that Satan did in 1962 with the Vatican II Accords. All right? It's, you've got the Bishop of Bishops is what Constantine called himself. I am the Bishop of Bishops. He's the Pope. The Pontifex, I'm trying to pronounce it, Pontifex Maximus. And so when he leaves to go to Constantinople, he puts the Bishop of Rome in charge. So he does several things here for this Bishop of Rome to put him in a position of, authority, but also to fit him up so that he's properly supplied and situated for such a position that he's been given. So you've got at this point this huge herd of new Christians who say, hey, if you'll come and get baptized into the church, we'll give you 20 pieces of gold and a white linen robe. And everybody's just flocking to it for that. 20 pieces of gold? Yeah, no problem. Give it to me. I'll worship a pig if I have to. Someone probably all worship pigs anyways. And so what they want to do here is they want to start cutting the herd, though, and getting the people out of there who are not going to follow along. People who know the truth, know the scriptures, they need to get them out before they can corrupt the process that they've got going. Okay? So in order to maintain peace and tranquility and unity in the Roman Catholic way, they bring in several other very noxious practices that are going to accomplish two things for them. Number one, it's going to be a huge appeaser for all these pagans that are now have been wonderfully transformed into Christians by being sprinkled with water. And it's going to help them to continue to root out those who aren't going to go along with the program. So he set up the Bishop of Rome. Number one, he gets him a crown. He gets him robes, robes of purple and scarlet, all decked out with jewels. And we find all that described. You go right over to Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about the whore. All right. He has a palace, a basilica built for him to be in, known as St. Peter's Basilica. And he's given a scepter. Now, a scepter is a item that indicates that one has power and authority, over all things. So not only is the Bishop of Rome, the authority within the church, he now becomes the authority in the secular as well. And of course, this leads to all kinds of infighting that's going to go on for a few centuries between Western and Eastern Rome on who the real boss is. Let's see if there's some notes here somewhere. There's one particular thing I wanted to bring along. We'll we'll come to that, it's further along. Well, anyway, so some things that they start bringing in here to appease these people. Evergreen trees. Jeremiah chapter 10. Go with me to Jeremiah chapter 10. Verse 4, 5, and 6. Actually, let's make it verse 3. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, and the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither also is it in them to do good. For as much as there is none like unto thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. Several places you'll read in the Old Testament in dealing with pagan worship, and particularly dealing with Israel adopting the pagan worships of the Canaanites there, where it talks about them worshiping under every green tree. Okay? And the reason why it's put that way is they are trees that are evergreen trees. All right, and it would be under these trees where they would worship their false gods, and these started showing up in the churches. And when they started showing up in the churches, is the same time when they would show up in the pagan worship, which is during the height of winter, because everything dies. But the evergreen trees, that's why they would have things like evergreen trees. They would have things like holly. They would have things like mistletoe, because these are all things that are green even when everything else is dead, because for the pagans, the winter solstice, all right, is when the days start getting long again. That's the shortest day of the year. And they always celebrated that as the birthday of Baal in all his different names. Okay, you go back to the mother-child worship that originated with Nimrod and Semiramis and their son Tammuz. All right, that after Nimrod was killed, all right, by Shem, that she claimed that Tammuz was Nimrod resurrected. Okay? And so this is in their pagan worship. And I mean, you go to any pagan religion entirely around the world, and you find the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the two equinox. Those are all things that are become part of the mysteries of their religion. So we start having evergreen trees showing up. We start having Easter bunnies and Easter eggs showing up during the spring equinox. If you go to Acts 12:4 is where we find the term Easter. It has to do with Astarte, okay, which is one of the mother-child gods, goddess of fertility. Okay, rabbits, eggs, the maypole, those are all signs of fertility in pagan religions, and that's where they get. Well, they're letting them bring all this stuff in here. In fact, if you have Alexander Hislop's The Two Babylons, if you don't, you've got to have that book. Pages 103 through 110, he brings all this out and bears all this out, very accurately, very clearly, the historical place of where these things came from.
What book would you say? What book?
The book is called The Two Babylons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the author is Alexander Hislop. You can get that from Jack Chick. No, not Jack. Jack has gone to heaven, but that company.
I've always wanted to read that book. I've never had it.
It's tough reading.
They say it's hard to read.
Well, again, Hislop, he's writing in the late 1800s. He has what was considered a classical education. Greek, Latin, and all, and so it can be some heavy reading at times. But the information that is in there, every Christian needs to have that book. Now, you've got all those rites, And so what you also have with the rites are those people who are associated with, you know, officiating over them or executing ceremonies of these rites. So you have the Vestal virgins enter in. They call them nuns. You have your black robe pagan priests now become black robe Catholic priests. You start seeing things like wedding ceremonies guided by ceremony in the church and wedding bands. It's a tradition we've all picked up. That's where that comes from. Religious processions where they will carry. Remember we were just talking there in Jeremiah, they can't go by themselves and they have to carry. They will carry around statues. They do that to this day, mostly with a mother and child statue, and we'll parade this thing through the streets. You're going to have that. Praying for the dead. You know, as if, yeah, I can do something for them, you know, to get them out of purgatory. This is when purgatory starts coming in, and so forth. We start having that. A place where, you know, you can suffer for just a little while for eating that bologna sandwich on Friday, you know, so you can be purified to go to heaven. And praying to dead saints, you know, as if they had, you know, initially it started with them, you were praying to the saint, asking them to intercede for you to God, which if you're saved you don't need, you're going directly to God. As time goes by, you become a saint. You can pray to the saint, and the saint can produce supernatural responses to your prayer. I mean, the Catholic Church is just one big, huge bunch of black magic, voodoo stuff. It's incredible when you really start getting into it and looking at it, how crazy it is. You've got all these pagan statues, you know, Greek and Roman gods and others, and so, well, you know, we can't have Zeus and Apollo and what Mercury, and so they start renaming them. You know, some of them are, oh, this is Jesus Christ. This is, you know, the Queen of Heaven, Mother Mary. This one is Peter. This one is Paul. This one is this. You know, and they start renaming all these statues, or they start making purpose-made statues and venerating the statues the same as they did their pagan gods. You know, like Yuletide there at the solstice becomes the High Mass of Christ, or Christ's Mass, and we all know the contraction for that, Christmas. You know, Samhain, which in your Celtic pagan religions was a 3-day ceremony when the living world and the dead world crossed into each other, and the dead could pass over back to here and vice versa, and so forth. Well, that became All Saints Day. All right, and the day before All Saints Day was the Hallowed Eve, which became Halloween. You know, the Resurrection Day becomes Easter, as we had talked about. You know, some of these are regulated strictly to Sunday, which again, the names that we use for the days of the week are all pagan names, and that, and of course, the day that Christ rose from the dead is going to change every year based on when Passover is. You know, if you look at the Jewish calendar, you can tell when these dates are. You know, and of course the thing is today, the Catholic calendar has something for just about every day of the year. You know, I mean, they have saints that most of us have never heard of. You know, this is the feast day of Saint whatever, or, you know, this is the holy day of Saint Tralphaz, and the day that his carbuncle drained or something. You know, I mean, it's just totally ludicrous, this stuff that they have. But all of this came in because of a custom that started in Babylon and carried over into all your Gentile kingdoms, Gentile powers, right up through Rome, when they would conquer a people and they would absorb them into their empire, they would absorb their culture also into their empire, and in order to keep these people content and peaceful, they would say, look, you can practice whatever it is you want to practice, okay? As long as you recognize the state religion and recognize and worship the head of the state religion, you can do whatever else you want after that. And that is exactly what was going on here. It started under the Roman Empire. It's now under the Roman Catholic Church. They're saying, hey, that's all right. You want to do this? No problem. As long as you attend the Mass, and as long as you kiss the big toe of the Pope, or the ring of the Bishop, and partake in the Holy Eucharist and all, as long as you acknowledge and you can do whatever you want. That's where you end up with stuff like voting, okay, or centuria, some of these things, and some of these other just strange things that have come out of churches all through around the world that are supposedly, Catholic, and you just oddball stuff that comes in on that. Then of course, the real Christians are saying, I ain't have nothing to do with that. I am not going to have anything to do with that. And it happened again when we had the Vatican II. Of course, see, when Rome was in power, okay, they didn't worry about trying to get along with everybody. Okay, they forced their will. When Rome is in power again, they will force their will. Okay, but what happened is after World War II, enough people knew what was going on with the Church of Rome and the fascists and so forth, that they lost even more power and prestige. So in order to pull everybody back in, we have this great big ecumenical movement that gets started. This is the very heart of modern day ecumenicism, is what we're seeing right here. It's like, okay, you're Catholic, but you want to be more modern. Okay, we're going to let you start having Bibles. Okay, it won't be a sin to have a Bible anyway, but you can only have these. You can't have this one. The real one we don't want you to have. Yeah. Anything else is okay. Again, I remember this all very vividly. You want to start having modern music. No problem. We'll bring it in. You want to start speaking in tongues. You want to start doing this, bring it on. They were all for it, as long as you still acknowledge the Pope. And a lot of hardcore Catholics were all against it. But see, where it really worked, and this is exactly what happened back then, and history repeats itself, is what happened here, the Billy Graham Crusades. When Billy Graham first started, he was an amazing, powerful man of God. And this country was well on its way there in the 60s to having a true revival again. He came from the West Coast, we've gone all the way east, west, that's how God works. But he got it in his mind, and I'm sure it's from some devil whispering in his ear, in his mind, that if he would compromise and allow anybody and everybody to come in, I'm talking about up on stage with him representing churches, you know, and, you know, we just don't talk about this and we don't say anything about this or whatever, you know, I've got a better chance of reaching more people for Christ. And I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of people who trusted Jesus Christ as their Savior through the Billy Graham crusades. But the vast majority of them never went past their salvation. Why? Because, well, you know, if you belonged to the Episcopal Church down here and you went to a Billy Graham crusade, okay, guess where they sent you back to? Okay? If you belong to a Catholic church, they sent you back to that. If you belong to a Methodist or whatever it was, that's where you got sent to. And that's why they had their representatives up there. And of course, he couldn't say anything against their doctrine, their false doctrines, their heresies, because he was cooperating with them. That's what got me kicked out of the prison in Gardner, is because, oh, well, if you just preach a straight salvation message every time you're here, you'll be okay. You know, and I'm going to tell you, you go to the prisoners are doing a great job of evangelizing themselves. What they need is pastoring. What they need is teaching. What they need is doctrine. And so that's what I was going in there to do, and I was refuting the ecumenical garbage, and I was refuting Islam, and I was refuting the Roman Catholic Church, and so, of course, because I wasn't playing nice, they kicked me out of the sandbox. Not on my head. You know, I did what I was supposed to do. You know, and I mean, this has gone to the point to where, I mean, you have nations that have ambassadors to Rome, including the United States. You know, I mean, every world leader almost, particularly all the major ones, they always, you know, if the Pope's around, oh, they run right there, and I don't care where they come from. You know, and they will acknowledge the Pope. You know, because the Pope's the big guy, okay? All your major world religious leaders all acknowledge the Pope as a holy man of God, including Islam, by the way. They consider him to be a holy man of God. It tells you where I place him. Now, coming back to the 4th century, when Constantine went to Istanbul, okay, to make it the capital of the Roman Empire. Again, what happened is things kind of split because folks in Rome didn't want to give up their status. And so the Bishop of Rome, whom Constantine had set up with all this pomp and everything, decided, well, you know, you can be the Pope of Constantinople, I'm going to be the... And this is where we get that split that has happened, and again, it's shown in. I'm just going to trying to think of the dream there with the statue. Who was that? Daniel, with the 2 legs of iron there, which is the Eastern Orthodox, which is still to this day centered out of Constantinople, Istanbul, and the Western, which is the Roman Catholic Church. They're the same church. They are the same bunch. They might practice some of the things a little bit differently, same bunch, just they got into this kind of a thing going on. And of course, they're constantly trying to, you know, kiss and make up on things, and once we get to the point of the one world religion, of course, all that will be water under the bridge with them. But that's what occurs here, is you've got the Bishop of Rome, you know, has a palace, has a crown, has royal robes, has a scepter, and so, you know, the same as Constantine declared himself to be the Bishop of Bishops, he declared himself to be, I am the Bishop of all the bishops. And you have the hierarchy that we see that exists today in the Roman Catholic Church starting to form, with the Bishop of Rome is above everybody else. And then you will have the council that's immediately around the Pope, which are the cardinals. They equate to, if you think of Roman government, to their senators. Then below that, then you have the various bishops. Each country has an archbishop that they are over, and the other bishops are all underneath that, and you get this whole thing watered down. And at the very bottom of that, you've got the laity. And so this is the scenario that we have going on here as we transition from the 4th into the 5th century. And of course, the icing on the cake here gets even better. Rome itself, the city of Rome, is crowned as the queen of all cities. Not the king of all cities, notice, but the queen of all cities. Again, go back to Revelation on all that. You have a fellow by the name of Gregory Nazianzen. Let me write his name out. It's kind of a strange name. Now, what's interesting about this fellow is that he's actually in Constantinople, not in Rome. And he's the bishop of Constantinople from the time that Constantine